Before we move on, there's just a few more loose ends to tie up. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of F1 in Review, the episode, the hour and part 2, where we look back at the Italian Grand Prix and also forwards to the return of the Singapore Grand Prix, which is coming up. Hello, I'm Tom Clabon and I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review Twitter account, where we post these episodes once they've gone out live on River Radio. And we covered large portions of the Italian Grand Prix, but one real elephant in the room we didn't cover was the red flag that never was. We got a yellow flag, didn't we? We fly all the way to lap 48. Daniel Ricciardo pulls over to the side of the track, and after, well, much deliberation really from the stewards and the powers that be, a full safety car is deployed. Wow, not a virtual one like earlier. And this saw seemingly every car pit for soft tyres in the anticipation, I think all fans had this as well, that we would go racing again, but we did not. Unlike Abu Dhabi 2021, we ended under the safety car. Max Verstappen won under that very safety car. I thought it was quite a bitter ending to this Grand Prix and the weekend more generally. What are your thoughts, Tristan?
Well, I know that listeners out there might be thinking, hold on a minute, I recognise this topic. And yes, we are to some extent rehashing old topics, but you know, can you blame us? We've got 3 weeks until between the end of the last Grand Prix and then the next one. So there's a little bit of a way yet to go, but we didn't have Tom's thoughts on this, and especially as now the dust has settled off the back of Monza, and we can start to reflect back with a little bit less of the tension and the hype surrounding the Temple of Speed, as Monza is colloquially known. I think we can look at it slightly more objectively. And unfortunately, Angus can't be here with us this afternoon, which is a bit of a shame, really, because I know he is very passionate. But luckily, he got plenty of time to voice his quite conservative opinions when it comes to Formula One and how it should be structured. He basically, Tom stated that he didn't want anything to change. It should end up under safety car, and we should all be, you know, graceful in accepting that is the way. But to be honest, I think the biggest issue for me, and I said it last week, and I'll say it again just for emphasis, is that lack of clarity is causing us problems here. Abu Dhabi was an incredibly high-profile case of this scenario coming up and causing problems, and off the back of that, we as fans were told a couple of things by the FIA. Firstly, so things are going to change. No longer was there going to be a figurehead directly accessible by the teams. So in the 2021 season, you had teams basically ringing up the then race controller Michael Massey and saying to him, "Hey, Massey, this is wrong. You should be doing like this." And then so you'd have Christian Horner saying you should do A, and then Toto Wolff be ringing up and going, "No, Massey, you should be doing B. What do you want about? Don't do A." And of course, that had a massive knock-on effect. And so at the end of the 2021 season, when we had this problem, I think many fans either felt like that they had been cheated because the figurehead had, Michael Massey had been manipulated, or they felt like a new precedent had been set with the option of the race director to basically say, "Yep, we're near the end of the race. We better do something slightly different to make sure we end under racing conditions." In the words of Michael Massey, "We're going motor racing," and that was quite an important, I think, thing for the sport because it created muddy waters. But one of the biggest issues for me is the idea that we're rushing safety. And I never want to see a marshal or a crane operator or even another driver, right, in Formula One who's eager to get everything back going, back to the green flag conditions, and so they cut corners. And unfortunately, because of that factor, I think there's a difference between calling a safety car on lap 10 versus lap 55 out of 60. Because if you're a marshal, you want to see racing as well. So you go, I'll quickly run over the track here and grab that piece of carbon fibre. We have seen previously marshals nearly being hit by Formula One drivers and Formula One cars because they've done silly mistakes. And equally, tractors. I never want to see a tractor on the track whilst there is any sort of movement on the cars. Because to be clear, I know it doesn't look very fast on the screen, but if you've ever been to a Formula One race and happened to have seen a safety car being deployed, like I have, you'll see that the Mercedes at the front leading them, or the Aston Martin at the front leading the pack, is basically on the raggedy edge of what it can perform, and the cars behind them aren't. The Formula One cars are taking it in their stride, but they're still doing well over 100 miles an hour in places. Hitting a tractor would be devastating. So, in my opinion, and this is maybe a side point, if there's ever a tractor on the track, I would actually be in favour of a red flag condition. And then all I'd ask, Tom, is they red flag the conditions. They say, right, you're not allowed to change tyres. And then, once the car is gone, what they do is they bring the safety car out and do a rolling start. Just like, imagine, like the safety car has now gone in, and then Max, in this case of Monza, would be backing up the pack like normal. But the difference is there was a red flag in the middle, just so that there's no live cars with a tractor. Yeah, your thoughts, please, Tom, on this particular topic.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, really, when it comes to safety and the deployment of safety cars, or virtual or otherwise, because by deploying a red flag, you pour cold water on the situation and take the sting out of it, and safety comes first. It's not a question of, we need to go and do this in 2 laps or 5 laps or 57 laps, because that's when the race ends. And I thought it was a real damp squid, really, the whole idea of ending under a safety car again. It's not one of those where I want to see artificial entertainment, like I hear those who say, there's got to be a restart here, be it red flag or otherwise, green conditions, so we end under racing conditions. But I'm one of those where if we have a condition, we have a protocol at the moment, which, to be fair, every team's agreed to, where races shouldn't necessarily be red flagged and restarted, you de-incentivise gambling and risks and opportunities being taken or otherwise. Because take this race, for example, just gone by in Italy. The Italian strategy, which was a bold gamble, let's be fair, was based on the fact that there was a virtual safety car at the start. There's probably going to be a full safety car or another virtual safety car later on. We know that at Monza, regardless of, I suppose, the lack of barriers and the fact that it's largely straight, there are huge crashes there. Take, for example, Hamilton and Verstappen last year as being a key example about that. So Ferrari have taken the gamble of, well, we know from history this could happen again. Let's go and pit early and then gamble on that happening. Well, it does happen, but it happens too late for them. And because of that, they then finished second or not first or further back. But meanwhile, Red Bull, who have taken the more conservative, safe option of pitting later and not taking a gamble, are the ones that go and win the day. And that's sending out the wrong message, I think, really, to teams when it comes to their strategy and the like, because you want to go and see them do things that perhaps do work spectacularly or don't, but we want to go and see them doing that knowing they will be rewarded. So I don't really get this argument that if we were to go and restart the race, it would be unfair against Verstappen, because how it ended, it was unfair against Ferrari. So it's always going to be unfair against somebody, whatever way you slice it, really. And I think with this current protocol as well, it's one of those where we do watch this for motor racing, don't we? We do watch this to make sure there's clean, fair competition and that whoever's fastest, whoever's made the right decisions win out the day. And I don't really think that the current protocol encourages that at all, really. We're more inspectors of, we've got to make sure we leave this with a warm sense of satisfaction that the race, well, it may have been dull as dishwater, but we've looked at every comma, every line, every paragraph, and it's adhered to, really. So in my mind, I'd like to see a scenario where, similar to yourself, if a race is going to be ended under a safety car conditions because there is such a huge crash or because such a car is in a position where it's, preventing racing from getting going, they go back to red flag conditions. I agree as well. I think the whole ideas of changing tyres where in those conditions is wrong as well, because they talk about cheap and free pit stops when it comes to virtual safety cars and safety cars, and that's already, or still does, should I say, cause outrage among some quartiles, namely the sort of older quartiles of the Formula One fan base, about how it being fair and based more on strategy than racing. But the red flag conditions where you can essentially change any single part of your car is a bit like cheating in my mind. So get rid of the whole new tyres things. Everyone goes back into the garages, comes out again, rolling start, and then whoever wins fair and square, really. But I think we've got into a position, or the regulators or the FIA, the stewards have got into a position where they're so scared after Abu Dhabi 2021, they daren't go and do something a bit unpredictable or something a bit different or a bit niche or a bit radical, because they fear another backlash again. But I think really, unless they don't go and change this protocol and don't put in place rules where we can end the race under some racing conditions, then you're kind of self-harming the sport there, I'd say.
I'm genuinely interested about this particular facet of, I suppose, F1 fandom that we've managed to find ourselves in and exploring, because I noticed that the fans and many fans are very accepting of the safety car and the way that, and I'm using air quotes here, but you can't see them, artificially. There you go. I've used an expressive tone to demonstrate my air quotes there.
Done. That's good.
Artificially impacts the sport and the particular race. But those same fans, and I'm pointing at Angus actually because he's an easy target, and explored this with me last week. Angus, very accepting of the safety car and the way that artificially impacts the result in the sport, but is in no way sort of amicable towards the idea of a red flag impacting the sport. Why do you think there is this difference in the way that the fans are seeing these two sort of type of interventions from the FIA?
That's an interesting one. I think it's more the fact that there's some drivers who are really good at starting from a grid position, and there are those who are not so good or better at starting from a rolling start. So I guess it's one of those that when a red flag's deployed, it's almost like, it's the end of a chapter, close the book type thing, we start again. It almost seems like a clean break, but a safety car in many ways, I guess, feels a bit different. And I suppose if you take away the fact that people can change tyres, change parts, practically rebuild their cars, you would perhaps have more of a similarity between a safety car, a virtual safety car, and a red flag. But it's almost like one of those, I find, that over the last few years, particularly last year, I find, thinking back to Silverstone, for example, where that was red flagged owing to the horrible crash to Verstappen, in a condition where it was yellow flagged or there was a virtual safety car, Hamilton wouldn't have been able to win that race or even finish it because there was critical damage to his car. However, because of the red flag rules, or lack of, he could essentially rebuild his car to some extent, go out again and win the race. So it's one of those where it allows sort of a free pass in the right circumstances to certain teams and drivers to finish and do better when they otherwise couldn't. But I think it's one of those, we see safety cars so much more than we do red flags. Red flags are almost seen as like the nuclear option, aren't they, in many scenarios when it comes to Formula One. Meanwhile, safety cars, it's a safety car, fair enough type thing. But in many ways, I think we need to normalise the red flag, not see it as sort of, a taboo type thing that we should never use, or, it should be used in only certain circumstances. And that would be perhaps have a different perception or optics about that. But I guess it takes time and it takes good communication from the stewards and the FA to go and break down that stigma, which, I mean, we said about this towards the start of the season. I believe before we even kicked off that the comms from the FAA had to be good, had to be better now that this communication between the garages and them were stopped in terms of mid-race. But they haven't really done that. They've just cut off one channel and said, right, you can't talk to us in the middle of the race. I get that, I understand that. But then when it comes to why decisions are made, take the starting grid, for example, this weekend, we didn't find out until, 10 hours or less before the race even started. You had various other drivers saying, hi, I'd like to know where I'm actually going to be lining up in a few hours' time. So really sort of missed a trick there, I think, when it comes to sort of bettering themselves. And this is why so many questions I think still remain of them, is because they seem to be making the same mistakes and just not letting people know why they've made decisions in a timely fashion without going to sending off a few paragraphs of a press release saying, we made this decision for X, Y and Z reason, deal with it, tatty bye, we'll see you in Singapore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. Maybe we need to introduce a new flag into Formula One, the timeout flag. I'll even name it for them. You can call it the Timex Timeout Take a Break, sponsored by Kit Kat flag, which they can wave down and everyone goes, okay, fair enough. And it's bizarre to me that in many sports that we have breaks, and there are you have stoppage play in football. And you have stoppage in rugby. You have golf, which just kind of never starts. And we in many other sports we normalise the idea of being like, hold on a minute, we need to check out what's going on here. Stop everything. Imagine in football if someone had hurt themselves or damaged their knee, and everyone was like, no, let's just keep playing. Bring out the safety ball instead. It just doesn't, kick as far or something like that. I think we'd all, raise questions over it. And I think it is a bit weird that in a sport which is incredibly dangerous, in which, speeds of 180 plus mile an hour are reached on a regular basis, and nearly every track, that we're like, nope. Just keep going. Keep sending them around. And the other thing is, it takes ages as well. It irks me that we have these massive crashes with debris everywhere, and they don't red flag it. And so what they do is they have to bunch the pack up, and then there's a good couple of minute window where the marshals can't get on track to pick up the debris and stuff. And so it takes ages for them to deploy. And the other thing, Tom, is I think annoying. The other thing about Monza was, as soon as Ricciardo stopped, I think our particular group chat lit up immediately with the words safety cars to come out. Yep. And they spent ages mulling it over, and I think this feeds into the problem, which is it seems like the FIA still are taking ages to make the decisions, and the communication is still not really there. And it's such a shame that we don't have huge amounts of time to talk about Monza as itself over the course of the weekend, not just in Formula One. Because, I do actually follow the Formula 2 and the Formula 3. And the Formula 2 was an absolute mess in its own regard. We had penalties being hit out left, right and centre. Basically, the top of the full half the grid ended up with penalties of some sort. It was an absolute disaster, and some weird rules by the FIA as well. Honestly, that was an absolute mess of a race in Formula 2. And so this problem of the FIA's stewarding skills, I think, transcends the different categories within the sport, which I guess is okay. At least they're consistently mediocre. But I think then it would be really useful, as I say, to get some more clarity on this, and just either put it to rest or say, yep, we're going to make changes. Because, I mean, it's not just me. Angus highlighted that Martin Brundle keeps highlighting that, when tractors are on track, that they should red flag. So clearly this is a problem that's sort of overarching. And I don't know, I think if you are one of these people sitting there thinking, yes, I'm accepting safety cars and virtual safety cars, but no, I'm not accepting red flags, I think perhaps you're in denial about whether or not you think there should be any intervention from the FIA. Because personally, I bundle them in to all in one as an intervention from the steward. So I'd be interested to hear what you think. Although saying that, if you're saying like Twitter, maybe I don't.
Yeah. But while there are plenty of negatives to come out of the Italian Grand Prix, there was one shining positive. Nick de Vries made his F1 debut at this Grand Prix in a Williams car. He was standing in or sitting in for Alex Albon, who was having appendix surgery, and thanks to all the penalties, he qualified in P8, but I think all of us thought, you're starting quite high, congratulations, big day out, etc. But would he be able to hold it? And hold it he did. He went down to P9, beating Ocon, Bottas, the two Hasses, to name but a few, and points on his first ever F1 Grand Prix. His first ever race means he joins those of Magnussen, Stoffel Van Dorn, Zhou, Buemi as well, those who have scored points on their first ever outing in a car. Now, Williams are yet to finalise who's going to partner Alex Albon for the next season. Tristan, does this display by the Dutchman convince you that he's worthy of replacing Latifi, or is he perhaps having to go somewhere else?
I think, as I said last week, very, very briefly on the subject when De Vries came up, this was a very honest first attempt in Formula One, because the poor Nick had woken up on Saturday morning expecting to be doing a little bit of the camera work, doing a bit of maybe commentating, feeding in here and there. And unfortunately, with Alex Albon having to go in for some surgery, he was unceremoniously thrown into Williams and into the car. And I can't stress this enough, how different that experience would be if you had time to prepare versus if it's off the cuff. Because everything is wrong when you jump into a Formula One car for the first time. Your braking distances are wrong. Acceleration is wrong. G-forces are wrong. The setup and the seat is wrong. Everything about it will be different. Bear in mind, in 2017, 2019, he was in Formula 2, and he's been working as well for the Formula E team in the 2019 season. And that kind of sport is very different, very, very different to Formula One. So he got thrown in at a deep end of the swimming pool with Williams, a team which many of us don't expect a huge amount from, and yet came out ninth, beat Latifi. And I said this last week that Nick de Vries had actually disadvantage against Latifi, because if you actually look how many places gained that Latifi had versus de Vries versus between Saturday's qualifying and Sunday's race, you'll see that Latifi actually gained an extra place over de Vries. So that actually mitigated to some extent the true qualifying difference that they had between each other. And yet de Vries was able to fend off Latifi and other established Formula 1 drivers and get to the end of the race and score points ninth on his debut in Formula 1. Everyone was going over to him and giving him big hugs afterwards. Max Verstappen came over and gave him a massive hug. Toto Wolff this week said that he would be surprised if Nick de Vries didn't get a seat. And of course he's going to say that because de Vries is part of the Mercedes sort of driver program, and before that he was part of the McLaren young driver program as well, very much baked into the Mercedes side of the paddock there. But personally, I think it's time to drop Latifi, even if he brings Lavatha Coffee and Safina Foods and his dad, who's worth a couple of billion, and change. I think it's time to drop Latifi and time for Williams to accept that they got to have two drivers that can be pulling in the points, because at the end of the day, Latifi's going to get bored and going to run away. Okay, at some point he's going to want to go do something else, and then they're stuck. So I think it's time to say to Latifi, thank you very much for your cash. I hope you've had fun. Off you go. Bring in Nick. Get more points. Get those extra points to get 7th versus 10th, for example, is a few $100 million worth of prize money game, and that's a lot of money. That's bordering on what Latifi might be throwing at this. So never underestimate the value of a good driver. You know, some teams are like, well, we've got our good driver and we've got our rich driver. And the good driver keeps the rich driver in check. And that's okay. You know, the Strolls can be pleased with that. But a proper team needs a good driver and another good driver that push them forward. It's like competition in business. You got to have competition, because otherwise it all stagnates and doesn't push the team forward. You know, drivers keep each other in check as well as they do the other drivers on the field. So I think it's time for Latifi to go, and I think that Nick de Vries did a fantastic job bringing home the points. And you know, if he, as I say, I'm going to paraphrase Toto Wolff and adopt the quote myself. If Nick de Vries isn't in the sport next year, I will be very surprised.
And I would also be surprised, to be fair, and I was equally surprised by the fact that he finished P9 in a Williams. I mean, I don't expect much from a Williams car, both their drivers as well, for that matter, really. Of course, I expect more from Albon than I do Latifi, but I don't expect them to be vying for points after a few races, and I especially don't expect a Williams to be vying for points after they've literally been chucked into the car after one of their drivers is having surgery. So I think that really does highlight the talent of Nick de Vries. He's always been one of these people I've seen in and around Formula One, standing next to Toto Wolff most weekends, chatting to him, going, yeah, I should do this, do that. I was like, who is this guy? What is he doing there? He looks too young to be part of the sort of, I suppose, engineering back staff. And I remember about a year or so ago when there was also discussions about the Williams seat, I think the Aston Martin seat as well. Liv, for our older listeners, remember her saying, oh yeah, I believe Nick de Vries should get this. And I was going, who on earth is this Nick de Vries fella? And now I see why there's so much hype surrounding him, why he's so ingrained into the Mercedes team, why he's in Formula E, because to do what he did is quite remarkable, really. And for him not to go and get a seat next season would be, quite frankly, crazy. In addition to the conversations that apparently have happened between Williams and him, there's also been, and it's been confirmed by Nick himself, conversations with him and Helmut Marko. The idea being, no, he's not going to Red Bull, that he would potentially go to AlphaTauri, replace either of the drivers there, because Gasly's future is very much in the air, as is Tsunoda's for that matter. So we could see him have to fully break away from the Mercedes team, fully go away from the right-hand shoulder, I guess, of Toto Wolff and join what they dub as the dark side of the paddock of Formula One. But either way you slice it, he deserves a chance in Formula One. I think the fact that his debut has come at the age of 27 highlights one thing quite clearly, and that's simply that money is so important when it comes to Formula One, because if it was based on talent alone, he would definitely have got that debut far earlier than before. Yes, he's been reserve driver for Aston Martin and for various other Mercedes teams prior, but that's nothing compared to actually being, one of the two men that has to go and get the points or qualify highly, and he's really put himself forwards there. And on the Latifi point of him replacing him, absolutely, I think he should. I think Latifi has spent far too long in the sport, really. We gave him a chance. There was very, very small, tiny embers of him doing quite well and improving, but he just frankly hasn't. But I think Williams' decision to dump Latifi and to bring in Nick de Vries or somebody who doesn't bring in so much cash will really sort of highlight, A, what Williams want to do moving forwards, or what Dorilton Capital want to do moving forwards. Do they want to be in Formula One just to be in Formula One and quite happy to often have the wooden spoon and compete for 9th place, or do they want to go and progress further up the grid? And I think as well, their selection in terms of the partner of Alex Albon will also show how their finances are doing, because if they're still having to go and rely on someone like Latifi or someone who has really deep pockets over someone who has talent, that shows you that perhaps the older problems of the Williams team before they were brought by the New York company are still very much there. But if you want to go and show the world how good you are, I can't think of a better example of what Nick de Vries has done there. But it remains to be seen where he'll go, if he'll go anywhere. But plaudits to him, really. I mean, quite frankly, remarkable.
Yeah, and it's nice, I think, for us to be citing quality drivers that could potentially get into the sport. And there is a lot of controversy at the moment surrounding potential drivers that might be entering into Formula One or might not be, and we'll be coming onto that shortly, actually. But I think it's important that these tests occur where a driver is given long race testing, and we have very short form testing, I think is how I describe it, and this will make more sense, I think, as I explain what I mean. And what I mean by that is we take a driver, and the FIA mandates that all teams must test twice a year, either one driver or two drivers. It's kind of up to them, but they have to do a test twice a year, and they have to give up one of the seats in a pre-practice session. So you might well have someone like Mercedes running driver A, and then later on in the year running driver B. They've fulfilled their obligation through driving two different drivers. Or you might have Williams who test driver C twice. Same thing. That also fulfills their obligation. But it doesn't really give them anything. It doesn't give them anything at all, really, apart from their experience driving a Formula 1 car and tick boxing. But if you said to them, right, so how prepared are you for Formula 1 and to race, then I don't think it's particularly brilliant. And I would love a wild card system, Tom, where every team is told, right, we're going to have 24 races next year, which is a lot of races. Each of your seats has to be passed to an up-and-coming driver for one race. So all drivers would be on an even playing field because all drivers would drive 23 races. And you might well be like, well, then, everyone might swap out their driver for Hungary, in which case, yeah, everyone might. They probably won't, but they could. And so it would give you a really interesting dynamic, because not only would it allow the number one and number two drivers within a team to have a break, but also means that it gives the opportunity for, if let's say number two driver is worse than number one driver, well, now they're up against a rookie, and now they get to test themselves like that, and vice versa. If you're Max Verstappen and you get beaten by the person Red Bull chucked in your seat, in Perez's seat, then what does that say? So I think it had a really fun dynamic. But look, at the end of the day, we're going to have a really long season, and it would be really good if we had these long-form tests. And this is what I mean by long-form tests, not just a session, but I mean a session into qualifying to a race. And that would be fantastic. And I could just hear all of the traditionalists in Formula 1 yelling at me, through their whatever they're listening to this podcast on. But to be honest, I think it'd be a fantastic addition. I don't know what you think.
Oh yeah, I like the idea. I mean, it's one of those, you have all these different teams having their academies, and then the members of the academies often go off to different academies or go elsewhere, because basically the pipeline is so chock-a-block, it's so stagnated, full of talent, and the talent's not getting an opportunity to fully go and exert itself, really. I mean, take George Russell, for example. He had to be very, 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 very patient to get himself into that Mercedes seat. And yes, it's all going rosy for him right now, but there could have been an alternative universe where he got to, let's say, the end of season 2 with Williams and thought, right, had enough. I'm not getting high up the leaderboard in terms of the constructors, in terms of a better team. I'm going to go somewhere completely different. So, what is the point of an academy unless you're going to be using these drivers? And I say using in terms of actually using them to go and get some points on the board, to get you higher up the constructors table, and ultimately, to go and get yourself some more points, i.e. cash as well, really, because it's fine to go and have reserve sessions here or sessions there or this sort of the other, but as you said, it doesn't really prepare you for what's to come when it comes to driving a Formula 1 car. But as you hinted at earlier, we often see a scenario where when a rookie comes in and does better than the other, that often is a sliding doors movement for the more permanent driver. I mean, to use George Russell as an example again, we go back to Bahrain, for example, the Sakir Grand Prix, where he completely blitzed Bottas, and if it wasn't for a few issues, he would have convincingly beat him. I think we're all in agreement there when it comes to that race, and Bottas was gone because Russell had shown his quality. It remains to be seen whether Nick de Vries will do the same to Latifi, but I suppose from a driver's perspective, that's why you don't want to do it, because it makes you a bit more vulnerable, and I suppose there's a lot of pride in it as well. But for the fans and for the spectators, and for the fact we've now got, a blockbuster 24 race season, a lot of racing going round, it would be a good opportunity to go and sort of bleed in, bed in, seeing younger talent and really show them, or really, sort of show the teams as well if they're up to the mettle, because if they can't go and really show their quality in a race, but are brilliant in, let's say, testing sessions, then which one would you prefer? I know which one I prefer, but there we go. And as we hinted at there's going to be a record 24 race calendar that being confirmed by F1's governing body on Tuesday. That's when we're recording for the upcoming 2023 season. That's going to see the new race in Las Vegas. That's going to see the return of Qatar and China as well. That's been away for 3 years. I mean, okay, really, if you can believe that. It's going to be the longest season ever. But with all the people, all the tracks that have come in, there are of course losses. There's the French Grand Prix that's going to be falling off the calendar, and it'll be beginning with Bahrain on the 5th of March and then ending at Abu Dhabi on the 26th of November. Monaco and the Spa Grand Prix in Belgium also retain their places. Monaco until 2025, but Spa only one more year has been added for that Grand Prix, for that circuit. Tristan, what's your thoughts on this calendar we're seeing here? The longest ever. We've got some new additions, some old faces and some falling off. Your thoughts on what we've got so far?
I'm not sure. Don't get me wrong, I'm a bit of a fan of the sport, but 24 races is a lot of races. I'm just looking at it, right? It's going to kick off on the 5th of March. So, given that winter testing will be sort of I'm gonna hazard a guess here, around the week of the 10th-ish of February, 10th to 15th of February, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it's sort of like the 18th. I'm going to go with the 18th. 18th to 19th of February is when I'm going to guess testing could be. But they're saying that's if they do 2 lots of testing, of course. They might not. So yeah. So maybe it could be like the weekend of the 10th and then the weekend of the 24th of February if they do 2 lots of testing. So we're not talking about a long winter break here. When we finish this year in December, it's only going to be a couple of months. It's not going to be long till we're kicking off back again. And I don't think it's healthy for the sport to have this many races, especially when we are jetting around. I say we are jetting around. I wish. Especially when we're virtually jetting around the world. And it's annoying, Tom, that they yet again haven't bundled everything together. If I may, 16th of April, China. 30th of April, Azerbaijan. 7th of May, Miami. 21st of May, going back to Italy for the first of the 2 Italian Grand Prix. So, we're going to China, Azerbaijan, USA, and then back to Italy. Oh, come on. That's 3 continents there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessary. They could have bundled things together, and when we're talking about the additions, that they're fine, but I'm genuinely worried about Belgium. And one of the things I noticed as well, Tom, is they've moved the summer break. So this is something I just sort of glanced at it and I was like, hold on a minute, that doesn't look right. We have the Belgium, and then we've got sort of a solid break between Belgium and the Netherlands. So we got 30th of July, Belgium, and then 27th of August, the Netherlands. So they've moved Belgium before the summer break, which I feel like is a bit of a shame, because personally I really like Belgium after the summer break, because I like looking forward to Belgium, because Spa is one of my favourite tracks, and I'm genuinely worried about its longevity. I feel like the FIA are honing in on an alternative for it, and I'm going to be very, very sad if that happens. But to be honest, I just think it's so long, and again, I don't know why they're not bundling the continents together, or at least trying to, because I get that different venues have time constraints, but it's absolutely ridiculous the amount we're doing jetting around, especially when the F1 is advertisement is sort of peddling this idea of sustainability. There's no point having fancy slogans if it doesn't hold up to actions. You can't just greenwash and hope that everyone's going to ignore the other environmental impacts. And yes, I know it's a dirty sport, it will always be one, but that doesn't mean we can't make improvements, right? We're like, well, I know we're burning X amount of fuel, but hey, what's another 100,000 litres? It doesn't work like that. Every little does help. And yes, if we're going to be a dirty sport, at least try and clean it when we can. But so my takeaway is it's too long at the moment, and it does end on my birthday, though, so that's always nice. I always look forward to a race on my birthday. So, yeah, unfortunately, that will be Abu Dhabi. I noticed that's something they haven't changed, Tom. Abu Dhabi.
Why, eh?
But, yeah, it'll be an interesting end to the season, having Las Vegas, then Abu Dhabi. But I just wonder. I wonder whether or not this is only going to be a 1 or 2 year thing where we have 24 races before they pull back a bit.
Yeah, I can only really echo your comments so far, Tristan, really. I suppose positives, we'll get those out of the way, so to speak. It's nice to have China back. I do like the Grand Prix they have there. I partly thought to myself, would we ever see another Chinese Grand Prix in the near future, owing to the Chinese government's policy when it comes to COVID and how stringent they are, shall we say, on infections there and preventing them. But nice to see that back. But then on the other sort of side of the coin, did Qatar really need to come back? Was anyone really missing Qatar versus Hockenheim, for example? Not really. I think it's quite clear why Qatar is on this calendar, really. Yes, it qualifies as being good enough for Formula One, and yes, it has other motorsport there, and that's fantastic, but it's not one of these tracks that needs to be on there because of its exciting racing. It's on there because, obviously, the people that own that respective circuit have a lot of money to go and pay Formula One and the governing body and all the sponsors, so it's just a bit annoying, really. And once again, as you say, with the number of times we're jetting around all over the place, we've got a US Grand Prix in May. Oh, don't worry, we've got another US Grand Prix in October. Oh, and don't worry, we've got another one in November. I mean, trying to at least make it regional based in terms of, let's say, we have the Middle Eastern section, the Southern European section, the North European section, the North American section. Trying to link it would go a long way, I think, really. But I am equally concerned as well, as you say there, about Belgium, because I always felt that Belgium was on its own little sort of podium almost. It had that sort of position as being the Grand Prix, the circuit where everything got back going again and we got racing again. But now taking that away and replacing it with Zandvoort makes you think, well, as long as Verstappen is flying high in the sport and he's still fairly young, and I doubt he's going to do a Nico Rosberg and go off into the sunset after winning X amount of world championships, that's always going to be there because it attracts so many people, and of course it's very visually appealing in terms of the amount of orange there as well. So it was almost like they're trying to phase out slowly but surely Belgium, and I wouldn't be surprised if come 2027 or 8 we just have the announcement of, Spa's no longer on the calendar because they were being awkward. We don't need them anyway. We've got 57 other Grand Prix to go to, so, their loss, am I right, folks? But, yeah, I mean, Las Vegas as well, that was uninspiring to say the very best, and we're getting a lot of circuits on here, and more isn't always more. I'd much rather have a smaller, slimmed-down calendar of, let's say, half, for argument's sake, circuits here, but at least let them be quality ones where we know there's going to be good taxing racing in terms of on the drivers, in terms of on strategy, in terms of even on engines for that matter. But we're not really seeing that. And to put the cherry on top of this disappointing cake, Monaco has retained its place for a number of seasons.
I can hear many people thinking that's a very good thing there. But do you notice that we didn't get told? We didn't get told how many sprint races there would be. So when it was announced last year, they said that half were going to be sprint races. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of quickly dropped down to 3, which is a little bit different. Tom, how many sprint races do you think we're going to get next year?
I think we've got 24. I would be, in the words of Toto Wolff, I would be surprised if there weren't 10.
You think so? I think we're going to get 6. So I reckon, so that'd be a quarter.
Yeah.
And I think some of them will matter much more than others. So my suspicion is they'll do sort of sprint races at Australia. I think we might get one at Spain, maybe United Kingdom, and then I can see another one maybe at Hungary. I mean, I did kind of like also the Austria one, so maybe we'll get Austria, and then we'll have the last ones will be like Brazil, much later on, at the end of the season. So I reckon they'll distribute them out, but I could see them having sort of 6, because at the end of the day, the sprint races are independently sponsored by, I think, Crypto. I'm trying. Sorry, my mind's flashing back to Emperor Max being paraded around at the British Grand Prix with a wreath around his neck and the silly medals. So looking forward to that. That sort of thing. They need to bring back the robots as well. I've noticed they haven't brought back those. Apologies if you don't get that reference. When the pandemic hit in 2020 and we finally got going again with racing, the FIA decided they were going to be new and innovative on delivering the trophies to the drivers. So they had them all line up in a metre or 2 metres apart in a line. And then they had an FIA representative put the trophy on a little robot, and then they drove the little robot over to them, and then the drivers then got them. And it was really sweet, and I really like the robots, and they should bring them back because it was funny. But yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think we're heading towards they're subtly dropping hints that old and traditional tracks that we love and aren't just made by Tilke. And don't get me wrong, some Tilke tracks are good. I do like China, for example, although some people don't like it. Those tracks are maybe going away, which is sad because I will be very, very sad the day we lose Spa. I've never been, and I've always wanted to. So, if they do, I might actually just have to go and enjoy the last race if I can. But Silverstone, as well, I see on the list as a track that might not last. They've had those problems there, and combined with sprint races as well, I could see a sort of a new era of F1 racing where they want tracks that could be good for sprints and be good for bringing in money. And unfortunately, the Arab states and the oil states, do that much better than places like Belgium, places like France, which just got the axe, Britain. These tracks aren't the ones that bring in all the money. Although there's more controversy around the Silverstone ticket selling. I don't know if you saw that, Tom. They were putting up the prices basically by the minute.
Yes.
And then they were like, "Oh, we paused it because it's a mistake." No, they didn't. What they actually mean is, we paused it because we've made a mistake. We realised that you were all noticing. So
yeah, we got caught. Sorry, not meant to have happened.
If you have managed to get your tickets for the Silverstone Grand Prix, that's excellent, and I truly hope you paid a fair price, because I was really disappointed to see that.
And we now take a step down to F2 to talk about the winner of F2, Felipe Drugovich, who has won himself the championship but finds himself without a seat moving forwards, be that in Formula 1 or be that in Formula 2. And there's also so many seats up for grabs in terms of Formula 1, as we've hinted at earlier. And there's also discussions about Colton Herta coming into AlphaTauri. Now, for those who don't know the man, he is not a Formula 1 driver, and owing to the fact that he is racing an IndyCar, he is without the current required amount of super license points, which means unless they change the rules, he cannot race in a Formula 1 team, whether he likes it, whether the team likes it, whether anybody likes it at all. He's not able to race. This got us thinking. I have to go and credits to Tristan on this one, in terms of thinking, how should a driver be allowed into Formula 1? Should they be allowed based on whether they come through solely the formulas, Formula 2, Formula 3, or should there be other avenues into the sport, be it the W Series, be it IndyCar, be it other sort of, I suppose, motor racing that's outside of the formulas? Do you think, Tristan, that the current route into Formula 1 is quite monosyllabic, quite sort of one-directional? There's only one route in. Should that change in your view, or stay as it is?
Look, to be honest, I think the idea is very good, the super license points, and the way it's structured means that the idea is you're supposed to get talent. Now, this topic kind of comes in twofold, and with two kind of issues that are linked together. And one of them, Tom, as you say, is Drugovich, and he's won F2, brilliant, great. But he's basically said that he should be allowed to return to F2 if there are no F1 seats. And I do kind of see where he's coming from, because it must be very disheartening to win F2 and then rise above all other young drivers, and then you look up and then there's nothing there. It's a bit like entering the world of work after university. I jest. Maybe it's not. But that's the thing. But the counter to that is, then what though? You either go back into the sport and you win F2 again and you reprove yourself, or you lose. At which point you've kind of accidentally shot yourself in the foot. And so there is this nasty surprise waiting for many F2 drivers, where they finish F2 hoping to get into F1 and there's no seats available. And part of this problem is that there's not high enough turnover of Formula 1 drivers, with people like Alonso, and another example is Kimi Raikkonen taking these seats away and hoarding them. Alonso's been bouncing between teams and is set to stay on longer. Then you've got the money drivers, the pay-to drivers, also taking seats. Aston Martin's one seat down, and then you got Alonso there now, so he's not gonna move. You got Latifi, that's another seat gone. You had Mazepin at Haas, so I do get where he's coming from. And then, but the other thing about getting into Formula 1, Tom, is you also have to get enough super license points. So for F2 drivers, if they win F2, that's brilliant. And they do actually then have enough super license points to get into Formula 1. But then let's say they wanted to go off and do something else. But what's weird is the FIA don't look at the different sports equally, which I find a bit bizarre. So if you come in second in IndyCar, you get 30 points, as opposed to 40 for Formula 2. So you have to win IndyCar if you want to get the 40 points. You can come third in Formula 2 for you to get the same amount of points. The W Series, by the way, is worth 15 points. So this series that Formula 1 and the FIA have cited as being this incredible thing that was going to help catapult female drivers and women drivers into F1, it's worth 15 points. It's not worth any, and that's another topic that I'd like to cover actually soon, about how they're not taking advantage of the W Series like I'd want them to, because it's down to people like Alpine now pushing these drivers, these excellent female drivers, into the sport. I don't think it's right that these points don't match up properly. So I think they need to take IndyCar more seriously. I think they need to take the W Series more seriously. Because to me, I find it a little bit weird that, for example, you could win IndyCar and get 15 points, but if you won Formula 3, you get 30 points. Well, how does that correlate? W Series is kind of supposed to be a bit like Formula 3, but it's not. They don't take it seriously, which I find very disappointing. So, with Herta, for example, he wants to get into the sport, Colin Herta, and he said he doesn't want to be exception. But the thing is, though, he's been doing very well in IndyCar, and this is where this has come from. He's done very well in IndyCar, and he hasn't got enough points. He's going to be down points. So we've got Drugovich, who is an F2 driver who's got 40 points and can't get into the sport, and then we got Herta, who's got 32 out of the 40 points he needs. But he's won 7 wins in his first 4 seasons at IndyCar, and finished 3rd and 5th in 2020, in the 2020 and 21 championship. So it's clearly a good driver, but can't get into the sport. So yeah, they need to shake it up a bit, because otherwise we're going to have a problem in progression into Formula 1.
I have to agree, it's a very sort of purist way, isn't it, of getting them into Formula 1. You do Formula 3, then your Formula 2, then your Formula 1, but not right in my view when there's talent that lies outside of the system. It's not one of those, it's almost like with Red Bull of old, where they go, no, I'm afraid there's lovely drivers outside of our academy, but we're only going to plough forward with Daniel Kvyat because he's part of our academy, and that's how we work. And it just, you've got such talent outside of that which you're just blind to because you've got to go through your channels. And as you're saying there's those examples there, Colton Herta, which you mentioned there. We can look at Pato O'Ward, for example, who was heavily linked to replacing Daniel Ricciardo for the upcoming season, next season at Formula 1, but as we see that Oscar Piastri has got that seat. And the cynic in me says if he wasn't racing in the IndyCar series, if he'd come through the F2 and F3 systems, he would perhaps have had a better chance of getting that seat. You need to look back further, for example, Michael Schumacher, the 7-time world champion Michael Schumacher, he didn't come through the formulas, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula anything. He was racing through the 90s and the sort of early 1980s and completely different things, not going through the traditional systems, if you will, and then went on to go and romp home with so many race wins. So yes, that's going back, but it's wrong, I think, for the system to be almost like, well, you've got to do it our way, you've got to do it the way we want you to go and do it type thing, or otherwise you're not allowed into the club. Because Formula 1 is meant to be about promoting the best drivers, meant to be about giving them the best chance and the best equipment and seeing who the best driver is. In my view, that's the whole reason that the sport is coming to being and why it's flourishing so much. It's the best people with the best technology, with the best people in the garages and in the paddocks creating the best technology for them to go and race around. And it's about innovation, it's about competition and competition winning out. And without bringing it back to the whole safety car conversation, the current system doesn't allow it to be that way at the moment. It hinders it. It puts almost sanctions on itself, really. So I think, realistically speaking, there should be a relook at this current system we have here. I don't think there should be a complete breaking down, that being said, of the formulas and the Formula 3 and the Formula 2 and the importance of that. But it shouldn't be one of those where we see somebody else coming in outside of the traditional route and we go, no, you're not allowed to go and do it. Please go through the main entrance and the main exit when you leave. Otherwise, you're not allowed, really. But you live in hope that it changes, but I think it'll take some time.
No, exactly, Tom. I completely agree. And I think this is definitely something that we should revisit next week once we got Angus back with us as well. Maybe we can talk about in depth about the way that Formula 2 and 3 are structured to get them up through the sport from Formula 3, Formula 2. Bear in mind you pay for Formula 3 and Formula 2. So that's another thing to add to Djokovic's comments is he would be effectively paying for himself to potentially lose a season or win one. So it's not something that's particularly easy, and you do definitely have to be wealthy to do it. And he's lucky that he wants to go back and do it again. But I do think after all the time and all the money and shipping yourself around the world and hoping that you place yourself in the position, that there should be something there. And it's frustrating that we don't have a more concrete outcome for Formula 2. I know that we would love to say, well, there's always a seat. F1 is partnered with F1's own racing team, and the winner of F2 gets the seat. But unfortunately, it can never work like that. But I think what would help is if other, and this goes back to the points thing, I think it would help if other racing categories were worth and valued as much. So yes, there might not be a Formula 1 seat yet, but your name's on there ready to go if you want to get into Formula 1. But then you go to IndyCar knowing that you don't have to win it to get enough points. You can come in slightly lower places, because that's like saying, well, after you finish Formula 2 you should win Formula 1. It's not going to happen. That's why it's ridiculous to me. So I think they could go some way to help themselves a bit by improving the points and making sure that other categories of motorsport are equally appealing to these young drivers.
And it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 30 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much, dear listener, for listening all the way to the end of this episode. be that live or via the listen back feature on River Radio or via your preferred podcast provider. You know all the ones I'm talking about. A reminder, you can follow myself, Tristan, and F1 in Review on Twitter. The F1 in Review account is all like that. No hyphens, no underscores, just F1 in Review, capital F. The next Grand Prix is in Singapore. That returns, but that's not this weekend coming. If you're listening on the week commencing the 19th, that's going to be the week after. But no doubt there'll be lots of us to talk about when it comes to the next episode 31 of F1 in Review. No doubt there'll be some more news, topics, interesting things for us to sink our teeth into and to rabble on about. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.